Let's begin with the most basic aspect of economic transactions. Simply put, an economy is the culmination of all of its transactions. Additionally, a transaction is a pretty straightforward process. You are always making deals. You initiate a transaction each time you make a purchase. In every transaction, a buyer and seller exchange cash or credit for products, services, or other financial assets. Credit has the same spending power as cash. Therefore, you might determine the total spending by adding the amount of credit and money spent. The economy is driven by the overall amount of spending. The price is obtained by dividing the amount spent by the quantity sold. It's a deal. It is the foundation of the economic system. Transactions power every cycle and force in an economy. Therefore, we can comprehend the entire economy if we can comprehend transactions. A market is made up of all the vendors and customers who are trading for the same product. There are marketplaces for wheat, cars, stocks, and millions of other items, for instance. All of the transactions in all of its markets make up an economy. Everything you need to know about the economy may be found by adding up the total amount spent and the total amount sold in each market. It really is that easy. Governments, corporations, banks, and individuals. Everyone exchanges credit and money for quality services and financial assets in the manner I just explained. The government is the largest buyer and seller. It is made up of two key components: a central bank that regulates the amount of credit and money in the economy, which sets it apart from other buyers and sellers, and a central government that collects taxes and spends money. In order to accomplish this, it manipulates interest rates and creates new currency for these purposes. As you can see, the central bank plays a significant role in the loan flow. I want you to focus on credit. The most crucial and arguably least understood aspect of the economy is credit. Due to its size and volatility, it is the most significant component. Similar to how buyers and sellers visit the market to conduct business, lenders and borrowers also do this. Borrowers typically want to invest in something like starting a business or buy something they can't afford, such a house or car, while lenders typically want to turn their money into more money. Both lenders and borrowers can benefit from credit. In addition to the principal, the amount borrowed, borrowers also agree to pay back interest. Because borrowing is costly, there is less borrowing when interest rates are high. Borrowing rises when interest rates are low because it is less expensive. Credit is established when borrowers make repayment promises and lenders accept them. Credit can be created out of thin air by any two people. That sounds easy enough, but because credit goes by several names, it can be difficult. Credit becomes debt as soon as it is established. In addition to being a liability to the borrower, debt is also an asset to the lender. The asset and liability vanish, and the transaction is finalized when the borrower repays the loan plus interest in the future. What makes credit so crucial then? Because a borrower can boost his spending when he gets credit. And keep in mind that the economy is driven by spending. This is so because what one person spends is what another person makes. Consider it. Every dollar you make has been spent by someone else, and every dollar you spend has been earned by someone else. Therefore, someone else makes more money when you spend more. Lenders are more inclined to lend money to someone whose income increases because they believe he is now more deserving of credit. In the short term, however, that may not be the case. Long-term productivity is most important, while short-term credit is more important. This is due to the low volatility of productivity growth. It is not a major cause of fluctuations in the economy. When we take on debt, we are able to spend more than we produce, but when we have to repay it, we are forced to consume less than we produce. There are two major cycles of debt swings. It takes roughly 5 to 8 years for one, and 75 to 100 years for the other. Most people experience the swings, but because they observe them too closely, day by day, week by week, they usually don't perceive them as cycles. We will take a step back and examine these three major influences and how they combine to shape our experiences in this chapter. As previously said, swings around the line are not the result of a great deal of hard work or invention. The main cause of them is the amount of credit. Take a moment to consider an economy devoid of credit. The only way I can increase my spending in this economy is to increase my income, which means I have to work harder and be more productive. Since my expenditure is somebody person's income, the only way to grow is through increased productivity. Every time I or anyone else increases productivity, the economy expands. We observe a development similar to the productivity growth line if we track the transactions and play this out, but we have because we borrowed. Cycles. There are no rules or regulations to blame for this. The way credit operates and human nature are to blame. Consider borrowing as merely a means of advancing your spending. You must spend more than you earn in order to purchase something that you cannot afford. You basically have to borrow from your future self in order to accomplish this. By doing this, you set up a future in which you will have to spend less than you earn. It quickly takes on the appearance of a cycle in order to repay it. In essence, you start a cycle every time you borrow. This holds true for both the economy and an individual. Because credit initiates a mechanical, predictable sequence of events that will occur in the future, it is crucial to comprehend credit. Credit differs from money because of this. You settle transactions using money. When you pay cash to a bartender for a beverage, the transaction is completed instantly. However, using credit to purchase a beverage is similar to beginning a bar tab. You're saying that you'll make the payment later. You and the bartender together generate both an asset and a liability. Credit was generated by you out of thin air. The asset and the liabilities don't go away until you pay the bar tab later. The transaction is concluded, and the debt disappears. In actuality, the majority of what people refer to as money is actually credit. In the United States, there is only roughly $3 trillion in total money, but there is roughly $50 trillion in credit. Keep in mind that the only way to raise your spending in a credit-free market is to grow your production. However, borrowing can also be used to boost consumption in a credit-rich economy. In the short term, but not in the long term, an economy with credit has higher spending and permits incomes to increase more quickly than productivity. Don't get me wrong, credit isn't always a horrible thing that just leads to cycles. When it finances excessive consumption that cannot be repaid, it is terrible. It works well, though, when it generates income and distributes resources effectively, allowing you to repay the debt. For instance, borrowing money to purchase a large television does not produce enough revenue to cover the debt. However, you could pay off your debt and raise your level of life if you borrow money to, say, purchase a tractor that enables you to harvest more crops and make more money. We can observe how credit generates growth in an economy by tracking the transactions. Let's illustrate. Let's say you have no debt and make $100,000 annually. Even though you only make $100,000, you are creditworthy enough to borrow $10,000, say, on a credit card. So you can spend $110,000 because you are spending money that someone else is making. $11,000 can be borrowed by the individual making $110,000 with no debt, in order for him to spend $121,000. His expenditures are another person's income, despite the fact that he has only made $110,000. Additionally, we can start to observe how this process operates in a self-reinforcing pattern by tracking the transactions. But keep in mind that borrowing starts cycles. The cycle must eventually come down if it continues to rise. We enter the short-term debt cycle as a result. Our economy is expanding as economic activity rises. In the initial stage of the short-term debt cycle, prices begin to rise and spending keeps rising. This occurs because credit, which can be produced overnight, is the driving force behind the rise in expenditure. Prices increase when earnings and expenditure increase more quickly than the amount of commodities produced. When costs increase, we refer to this as inflation. Since rising prices lead to issues, the central bank does not desire excessive inflation. Higher interest rates are the result of it. The cost of current debts increases, and fewer people are able to borrow money. Imagine this as your credit card payments increasing each month. As a result of people taking out fewer loans and paying off their debts more heavily, they have less money available for spending. As a result, spending slows down. Incomes decline because one person's expenditure equals another's income, and so on. Prices decrease when consumers spend less. We refer to this as deflation. A recession results from a decline in economic activity, if inflation stops being an issue and the recession gets too bad. With low interest rates, the central bank will lower them to get things going again. We predict further expansion as borrowing and spending increase and debt repayments decrease. The economy functions like a machine, as you can see. The primary factor limiting expenditure in the short-term debt cycle is the willingness of both lenders and borrowers to provide and accept credit. When financing is readily accessible, the economy is expanding. When credit is difficult to obtain, a recession occurs. Keep in mind that the central bank is largely in charge of this cycle. Usually lasting 5 to 8 years, the short-term debt cycle repeats itself for decades. Observe, however, that both the bottom and the top of each cycle end with greater debt and more growth from the preceding cycle. Why? Because it is pushed by humans. Rather than repaying debt, they prefer to borrow and spend more. Human nature is that way. As a result, over extended periods of time, debt increases more quickly than income, resulting in a long-term debt cycle. Despite this, lenders continue to freely provide credit to borrowers. Why? Because everyone believes that everything is going well. People's attention is solely focused on recent events. Both asset values and incomes have been increasing. The stock market is booming and roaring. Using borrowed funds to purchase products, services, and financial assets is profitable. We refer to it as a bubble when a lot of people do it. Therefore, incomes have been increasing almost as quickly as loans to balance them off. Let's refer to the debt burden as the debt-to-income ratio. The debt load is controllable as long as incomes keep increasing. Asset values rise together. Large sums of money are borrowed by people to purchase assets as investments, which drives up their prices. People experience riches. Therefore, increasing salaries and asset values help borrowers stay credit eligible for a long time, even when they accumulate a lot of debt. However, this clearly cannot go on indefinitely, and it doesn't. Debt loads gradually rise over decades, resulting in ever higher debt repayments. People are forced to reduce their spending when debt obligations begin to outpace revenues. Additionally, since one person's spending equals another's income, incomes start to decline, which makes people less creditworthy and reduces borrowing. Spending continues to decline as debt repayments increase. The cycle then goes backwards. This is the peak of long-term debt. The United States, Europe, and a large portion of the rest of the world are just too heavily indebted. This took place in 2008. It occurred for the same reason as it did in 1929 in the United States and 1989 in Japan. The economy is now starting to deleverage. When people reduce their spending, their incomes decline and their credit vanishes. Prices for assets decline. Banks are squeezed. Social tensions increase. The stock market plummets. and the whole thing begins to feed back on itself. Borrowers are pressured when incomes decline and debt obligations increase. Borrowers can no longer borrow enough money to pay back their debts when their credit becomes unworthy. Hurrying to cover this gap, assets must be sold by borrowers. At the same time that spending declines, the market is overrun by the haste to sell assets. The stock market crashes at this point. Banks experience difficulties as the real estate market collapses. The value of the collateral that borrowers can provide decreases when asset prices decline. Borrowers become even less creditworthy as a result. People experience poverty. Credit is quickly lost. Reduced spending, income, wealth, credit, borrowing, and so forth. A vicious circle exists. The difference between this and a recession is that in a recession, interest rates cannot be cut to save the day. While reducing interest rates encourages borrowing, it is ineffective during a deleveraging process because interest rates are already low and will eventually drop to 0%. The excitement is therefore over. Both in 2008 and during the 1930s deleveraging, interest rates in the U.S. fell to 0%. The distinction between a deleveraging situation and a recession is that in a deleveraging situation, borrowers' debt loads have simply become too heavy to be alleviated by decreasing interest rates. Lenders recognize that loans have grown too huge to ever be fully repaid. Every deleveraging in contemporary history has taken place in one of these four methods. As we just observed, spending is typically reduced first. To pay off their debt, people, companies, and even governments tighten their belts and reduce their spending. This is frequently called austerity. You could anticipate that the debt load will lessen when borrowers begin to pay off their existing loans and cease taking on new ones. However, when spending is reduced and one man's expenditure becomes another man's income, the converse occurs. Incomes decline as a result. As we've seen, they decline more quickly than loans are paid back, and the debt load actually worsens. Spending cuts are difficult and deflationary. Cost-cutting measures by businesses result in fewer jobs and more unemployment. The following step follows from this. Debt reduction is necessary. Many debtors are unable to pay back their loans. Additionally, a lender's assets are a borrower's debts. People hurry to take their money out of the bank when a borrower defaults because they fear the bank won't be able to pay them back. Banks are strained, and individuals, companies, and banks fall behind on their payments. This sharp decline in the economy is a depression. People realizing that much of what they believe to be their wealth isn't actually, there is a major contributing factor to a depression. Now let's return to the bar. You pledged to pay the bartender back when you purchased a beverage and placed it on a bar tab. The bartender benefited from your commitment. However, his asset is worthless if you fail to fulfill your end of the bargain, if you fail to reimburse him, and if you effectively default on your bar account. It has essentially vanished. Many lenders consent to debt restructuring because they don't want their assets to go. Lenders receive less repayment when debt is restructured, could receive repayment at a lower interest rate or over a longer period of time than initially negotiated. A contract is somehow breached in a way that lowers debt. Even while debt is eliminated, debt restructuring makes income and asset values vanish more quickly, which makes the debt load worse. Lenders would rather have a little of something than nothing at all. Spending debt reduction is as difficult and deflationary as cutting. The central government is impacted by all of this since fewer jobs and lower salaries result in lower tax revenue. Simultaneously, due to the rise in unemployment, it must spend more. Due to their insufficient funds, many unemployed people require government assistance. In order to compensate for the decline in the economy, Governments also develop stimulus initiatives and raise spending. Because they spend more than they take in from taxes, the government's budget deficits blow up during the deleveraging process. When you hear about the budget deficit on the news, this is what happens. Governments must either borrow money or increase taxes to cover their deficits. But who is going to get the money from the wealthy when salaries are declining and so many people are unemployed? Governments naturally raise taxes on the wealthy because they need more money and because wealth is concentrated in the hands of a small number of people, which makes it easier for the economy to redistribute wealth. As the wealthier haves are squeezed by the failing economy and declining assets, the have-nots who are suffering start to detest the haves. The economy might seem complicated, but it actually functions like a simple machine. Once you understand the basic parts and how they interact, everything becomes clearer. Booms, recessions, inflation, debt, all of it follows predictable patterns. The entire economic system is built from something very small: transactions. When you combine millions of transactions made by people, companies, and governments, you get the whole economy. 1. Transactions, the foundation of everything. Every time someone buys something, goods, services, financial assets, a transaction occurs. In each transaction, a buyer exchanges money or credit for something of value. If you add every transaction together in a country, you get the total spending. That total spending drives the entire economy. This is why when people spend more, the economy speeds up. When they spend less, it slows down. 2. Money, credit, and spending. People can spend in two ways. 1. Using money they already have. 2. Using credit, which is borrowed money. Credit increases spending power immediately, but it creates debt, which must be repaid later. So, more credit, more spending now. More debt, less spending in the future. This dynamic is at the heart of how the economy expands and contracts. 3. The role of lenders and borrowers. Credit exists because one person wants to save and another wants to borrow. A borrower believes that their future income will be high enough to repay what they borrow now. A lender believes the borrower is trustworthy. They will get back more than they lent through interest. This relationship fuels economic growth, but it also creates cycles. 4. The three main forces in the economy. The economy is moved by three big forces. Force 1, productivity, growth. This grows slowly over time. As people learn, innovate, and build better tools, they produce more. This increases living standards in the long run. Force 2. The short-term debt cycle, 7 to 8 years. Borrowing rises, spending rises, and the economy heats up. Then debt becomes too heavy. Spending drops, and the economy cools, leading to a downturn. This cycle repeats often. Force 3. The long-term debt cycle, 50 to 75 years. Over many decades, debt accumulates faster than incomes. This eventually leads to a major adjustment, a big deleveraging. 5. How the short-term debt cycle works. Here's the typical pattern. 1. Credit becomes easy. 2. People borrow more. 3. Spending increases. 4. Incomes rise. 5. Asset prices go up. 6. Debt grows faster than income. 7. Central banks raise interest rates to cool things down. 8. Borrowing slows. 9. Spending drops. 10. A recession occurs. 11. Rates fall again. 12. The economy recovers and the cycle restarts. This is why we see repeated expansions and recessions. 6. The long-term debt cycle, the bigger wave. While short cycles come and go, the long-term cycle builds quietly. Over many short cycles, debt grows faster than people's ability to repay it. Eventually, the debt burden becomes too large for the economy to carry. This leads to a major reset, known as a deleveraging. It's different from a normal recession. It's deeper and takes longer to fix. 7. What happens? During a deleveraging, when debt becomes unmanageable, there are only 4 ways to deal with it. 1. Cut spending. 2. Reduce debts, restructuring or forgiveness. 3. Redistribute wealth from rich to poor. 4. Print money. Central banks create new money. A balanced mix of these can stabilize the economy. Too much of any one method can cause problems like deflation or inflation. Countries that handle deleveraging carefully recover faster. Those that don't face long periods of pain. 8. The central bank, the economy's regulator. The central bank plays a key role by controlling interest rates, money supply, credit conditions. When the economy slows, the bank lowers interest rates to encourage borrowing and spending. When the economy overheats, it raises rates to prevent too much debt. It's like a thermostat trying to keep the system stable. 9. Productivity, the real source of long-term wealth. While credit creates short-term boosts, real wealth comes from productivity. Productivity grows when people learn more. Technology improves. Businesses invest in efficiency. Better tools and systems are created. This is why some countries grow richer over decades, even if they face many debt cycles. 10. The big picture, how the machine moves. When you put everything together, the economy becomes predictable. Transactions form the base. Credit amplifies spending. Debt cycles create ups and downs. Productivity determines long-term living standards. Central banks adjust the system when it drifts too far. Once you understand these mechanics, you can anticipate what's coming next. 11. Lessons for individuals and countries. Whether you're a person or a government, don't let debt grow faster than income. Use credit for productive investments, not consumption. Focus on long-term productivity. Watch the debt cycles. They always repeat. Don't be fooled by short-term booms. The economy rewards discipline and punishes excess. That's the economic machine in simple terms. It may look complex, but it runs on a few straightforward principles. Understand these, and you can navigate markets, business decisions, and financial cycles much more confidently.